Greetings, my name is Mike Mitri, and I'm the developer of a software application called Story Analyzer, which combines natural language processing and data visualization to demonstrate the maxim, a picture tells 1,000 words. Story Analyzer generates interactive visual dashboards of narrative text. Story Analyzer dashboard identifies the characters of a story and depicts their relationships. It illustrates the places where and the times when these interactions occur. It also shows major themes of the narrative. And these dashboards include many types of visualizations, including word clouds, geographical maps, timelines and calendars, hierarchies, and networks of various sorts. You as a user can interact with the dashboard to quickly navigate and understand the narrative, even if it's lengthy, even if it's complicated. As I said before, a picture tells 1,000 words. Story analyzers created dashboards of news articles, Wikipedia articles, academic articles, legal documents, minutes of meetings, tweet threads, and other text sources. It's been applied to business, politics, philosophy, literature. You can see much of this at my website, storyanalyzer.org, and I'm going to show you that pretty soon. I've been working on Story Analyzer for 8 years now. In my journey with this hobby of mine, I keep trying to challenge myself, and I think I've met some challenges. You can judge for yourself if you want to look through the website. It shows dashboards of some highly relevant, timely stories, if you want my humble opinion. But I can't think of a better way to test Story Analyzer than applying it to what many would call the greatest story ever told. That would be the Bible. Bible is probably the most widely read, or at least the most widely distributed story in the world. Actually, it's a composite of many stories, stitched together in a bundle of narratives that may be the most influential in human civilization. There are 66 books in the Bible, 39 in the Old Testament and 27 in the New. Each book is a story written by a different author. Some are written by multiple authors over many years. Some would count today as real books. Perhaps some others are what you'd call short stories. They all include characters, sometimes many. Most of the characters are mortal human, but some are divinities or spirits. And of course, there's the head honcho of all divinities, Jehovah, God, Yahweh. These are some of the names he goes by. Note the pronoun he. The Bible is a pretty patriarchal book. There are also groups of characters, families that spring from some mating of a patriarch with a matriarch, or two, or three, and then turn into clans, and then tribes, and then perhaps nations. These groups have different ideologies and beliefs, and they often clash with each other, kind of like now. Characters and groups interact with each other, and their interactions form the plot of the biblical story. Of course, these interactions happen in certain places, mostly in the Levant, Northeast Africa, and around the Mediterranean, or in some netherworld of spirits. And of course, they happen over time. The books are written at different time periods, and the stories they tell also refer to different time periods. So, as with all stories, what you have in the Bible is a narrative of people and groups of people interacting with each other at certain places and at certain times. This is what forms the plot of a story. But there's more to a story than that. Good story has themes, morals, lessons, drama, pathos. This is what gives a story its soul, if you will. And you certainly see a lot of that in the Bible. That's why it's so compelling to so many people. The Bible is chock full of emotions and feelings, conflict and war, moral and ethical commandments. It talks about money and law and justice and injustice. It includes sex, lots of sex. And there's a whole lot of warnings about sin. And, of course, it includes death. The Bible in particular, perhaps more than most stories we tend to read, includes a good amount of ritual. And there's an otherworldly metaphysic that's more prominent than what we typically see in modern stories. Almost everyone is impacted by the cultural influences of the Bible, whether or not they're believers. I don't consider myself to be a religious person, but I do take some lessons from the Bible. The current explosion of AI, and especially natural language processing, revolutionizes the study of manuscripts like the Bible. Sophisticated data visualization technologies can present these AI results intuitively and interactively and can be a lot of fun to use. And of course, it helps to have a good coder around to put it all together. That would be me. So here's what I intend to do in this video. First, I'm going to demo the dashboard, and I'm going to try to relate it to everything I was saying up to this point about the Bible. I hope that by doing that, it'll entice you to want to play with the dashboard yourself. There's a link to the dashboard and a link to my website in the description of this demo. Maybe you'll be interested in knowing how I did this. What was the underlying technology? What was the methodology? So I'm going to talk about that as well. Obviously, I make use of AI tools. I make use of data visualization tools. There's a lot of coding going on. There's data analysis and data correction and data transformation and data preparation. So all of that process will be explained. And then I'm going to conclude with a few thoughts of my own. First of all, about how I learned the Bible. I don't consider myself to be a biblical scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that after this project of mine, I became somewhat of a biblical learner. I also want to talk a little bit about AI and where I see AI going. I've been involved to some extent in artificial intelligence since the 1980s, so I've seen a lot of the evolution in this field. So I'm going to have something to say about that, and perhaps also something to say about social ramifications, etc. And then I want to finish with where I see myself going with this little journey of mine, this little hobby of mine in the future. I hope you enjoyed the show. The best way to get to the dashboard is through my website, which is storyanalyzer.org. There's a link to it in the description under this video, and I got the site up right now. You'll see that my newest venture is, in fact, the Bible. It's built on other things I've done, particularly these two areas right here. And I mentioned to you that I think I captured some pretty timely stories, which is these dashboards on the right. I used to think they were timely. Maybe now it's a moot point. You might also be interested in philosophy stuff. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is a very interesting site, and I captured some articles about this stuff on the left. A lot of what I did for these dashboards I made use of for the Bible. There's also older stuff that I like to call Story Analyzer 1.0. I guess I'm at 2.0 now. I better be after 8 years of work. So without further ado, let's go to the dashboard. I'll just click here. And so here it is. You see on the left we have names of people and groups of people that are in the Bible, and they're sorted by frequency of appearance. And then here we see the Old Testament and the New Testament, all the books of both Testaments, and those are sorted chronologically, or at least not chronologically, but according to how they appear in the Bible. By the way, I'm using the American Standard Version of the Bible for this dashboard. And then there's all of these sections of the Bible that I'm going to go through: books, relations, places, timeline, 10 Commandments, 7 deadly sins, and ideas and themes. So let's start with books. I'll just click the button. By the way, I'm interacting entirely with the mouse or the touchpad. Everything is either a mouse hover or a mouse click, or once in a while a drag. So I clicked books, and you see this empty space in the middle. We'll see what happens with that as we progress. And on the right, there's a word cloud, and this word cloud contains the most frequently occurring words and the most frequently occurring two-word phrases in the Bible. And the sizing is according to frequency, so words are compared to other words and phrases are compared to other phrases. And we'll see what happens there as we progress as well. And obviously on the left, we see the book names and the character names and the group names, etc., just like we saw before. Let me click on Genesis. So I click on Genesis, and this thing in the middle that appears is called a tree visualization, and it shows all the characters and groups that appear in Genesis. And on the left, you can see all of the characters highlighted that appear in Genesis. So Jehovah, God obviously do, but David, Moses, and Jesus don't, because they don't come till later, right? And also the groups that appear are highlighted. If I kind of click through Exodus and Leviticus, you can see who appears. And always, just look on the left there, you're always seeing Jehovah. But I go to the New Testament, you never see Jehovah. So Jehovah is kind of an Old Testament thing. So let's go to let's pick maybe some characters and see what happens. So I'll pick Jehovah. And now that I picked Jehovah, we see all the books where Jehovah appears. If I pick Jesus, where does Jesus appear? In the New Testament books. If I pick Solomon, where does Solomon appear? Actually, Solomon appears both in Old Testament and New Testament. So does David, appears both in Old Testament and in New Testament, as you can see. So you can figure out where characters are involved. The same thing with groups. Where do Jews appear? Where do Philistines appear? Where do Chaldeans appear? Etc. Let's pick a book. I'm going to pick Leviticus. And in Leviticus, let's pick Aaron. And so I picked Aaron, and here's all of the verses. So when I selected Aaron, let me do this again. Let me go click Leviticus again. So here we have the names that appear in Leviticus. I'll pick Aaron. I picked God, excuse me. Pick Aaron. And here's all of the verses that have Aaron. As I'm hovering over, these are the verses. What we see at the rightmost part of this tree visualization are all the verses within Leviticus that has Aaron. And as I hover over a verse, I can see that whole verse, and Aaron's name is highlighted. And if I click on that particular circle, the text is frozen in place. And if I hover over this little blue piece, we can see that the sentences around that verse. And if I click then again here and leave, the text disappears. So this kind of popping up of the text having to do with a particular verse in this case is a frequent occurrence, but also having to do with other things. For example, let's go to the word cloud. And in the word cloud, we can pick a word. Let's pick unto. So here's everywhere where unto appears with Aaron in Leviticus. Let me do that again. I'll pick unto, and it appears. I hover over to come, and it appears. I hover over to burnt offering, and it appears. Let me click on burnt offering in the word cloud where I'm hovered, and now the text is frozen. Here's where I might be able to drag a little bit. I'll drag it over here. So I'm now I've got the word cloud. And I can kind of scroll up and down, and here's all of the verses where Aaron appears with burnt offering in Leviticus. And once again, I can do the same sort of thing as I did before. I can see surrounding text. And once again, I can click, and then I'm done. So this is kind of the interactions that you can have with the books part of the dashboard. And it enables you to see a big picture view by looking at a book, seeing who the actors are, looking at an actor, seeing where they appear, and seeing the specific text. And likewise, the same thing with actors. If I pick David, here's all of the books where David appears. If I pick a book, Here's all the places in 1 Chronicles where David appears. So that's your interaction through the books. So I looked at books. Now let's look at relations. So I'm going to click this button here. And it says to click a book on the left to see interaction. So let's start clicking some books here. There's Genesis, there's Exodus, there's Leviticus, etc. In the New Testament, same thing. If I go to Genesis, and let me scroll up a little bit here, we see in all of these are network diagrams, and in all of these we see the dots that are blue represent people, the dots that are red represent groups, and in the middle there you got the white that represents God or Jehovah, and some of the links are just gray and thinner, and others are thicker and more dark black. The ones that are just gray are just connections in that the two entities that are being connected appear in the same verse, and the ones that are darker and black mean that there's some direct activity going on between the two of them. For example, if like here, I'm going to go to Exodus again. Say I wanted to choose strong connections. Let me go back to Genesis. And now we see only the strong connections, which means that they are the ones that have direct actions going on. So if I pick I just made the screen a little bigger. Direct interactions between Terah and Abram. Terah is begetting Abram. If I want to say Terah and Haran, Haran is begetting, as Terah is begetting Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So there's those kinds of direct activities going on. If I want to see Jacob and Pharaoh, what's going on between Jacob and Pharaoh? Jacob is saying things to the Pharaoh. So we have all of that stuff going on in terms of direct connections. Let me shrink the screen down a little bit again. If I want to see all the connections, I just won't check that. Let's go to 1 Samuel. By the way, some of these have a huge number of people. Look at 1 Chronicles, huge number of people. But some of them don't have that many people. Look at Ruth, not all that many people. But let's go to 1 Samuel. And we can see who the people are that are in that book, 1 Samuel. And David turns out to be pretty prominent in that book. Let's pick David. And we see the connections between David and others. Let me kind of raise the screen up a little bit again. And here's all the connections between David and other people. And let's pick Abigail. Abigail is one of the women that come up a bit in the Bible. Not a lot of women mentioned all that much in the Bible. Later I'm going to talk a little bit more about women, but here we have Abigail and David who have some connection going on. And let's take a look at, say, 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 23. And there we see that Abigail sees David and she hastes and she alights from her ass, which I assume means a donkey, and she falls before David on her face and bows herself to the ground. Well, David's really got something going on there because no woman ever did that for me. Let me click out of here. Let's go to the New Testament in Matthew, for example. David turns out to be in Matthew as well. Let me make this a little bit bigger. David is connected to Joseph, as you can see. And that shouldn't be too surprising because Joseph, who is Jesus' father, was descendant from David. So we have that going on. And of course, Jesus is going to appear prominently in this book, in the book of Matthew, which is the current book that we're looking at right now. And if we look at Jesus, we can see Jesus, for example, connecting with Mary. Oops. And the connection between Jesus and Mary, as we can see here. So we have all kinds of interactions going on between entities that you can see in this particular section of the dashboard, relations. And all over the place, we can go to all kinds of different places. If I go to Mark, and we see Jesus again in the center, And actually, Jesus is connected to Pontius Pilate, right? As one would expect. So that's relations. And similarly to before, we can hover over something, it'll bring up the text, and then we can click on that thing, it'll freeze the text, and then I can see expansions from the text, as we saw in the other section of the dashboard. The third section of the dashboard has to do with places, so let me click on that, and you can see the names of a bunch of places in a word cloud, and the sizes obviously refer to frequency of times that you see that place mentioned in the Bible. And then you also see a map. This is a Google map, so a lot of people know about how to use Google Maps, so it shouldn't be that difficult for you to interact with. You'll see that the map has some dots around it. The blue dots represent countries, and the green dots represent cities, and the red dots represent other locations. So if I hover over Egypt, you can see stuff having to do with Egypt. And if I hover over, way up here on the left, Rome, you can see stuff having to do with Rome, and etc. And obviously, here we have Damascus as well. Similarly, I can hover over a word, like, for example, Jerusalem, and you'll notice that when Jerusalem appears, when I hover over Jerusalem, number one, the text having to do with Jerusalem appears, but also you see this little globe that appears where Jerusalem is. If I hover over Babylon, Babylon is in Iraq. And if I click on, like before, if I click on that particular word, or for that matter, if I clicked on the dot, the text freezes. I can move it around if I want, and then I can see surrounding text for it. So we can easily figure out what was happening where in the Bible. Okay, we've done books, we've done relations, interactions, we've done places, and now let's look at the time dimension here. So I'm going to click on timeline, and we see a timeline of the different books. Obviously, this is an approximate timeline, an estimated timeline. Nobody knows exactly when things happen. But I did some Google study and came up with these timelines. You can see that Genesis takes place over a very long period of time. Judges takes place over a fairly lengthy period. A few others do as well. And others are much shorter periods of time. And if we get down all the way to the New Testament, all this stuff in the New Testament is over a period of just, a few years. All these books, a year or two or three or something like that. So we have all of these estimated timelines of when these books, of the events of these books are supposed to have taken place, and or when these books were actually written. Let me go to one of these. Let's look at Exodus. When I click Exodus, you'll see this table that comes up. I'll drag it over here. And what we see in this table are some major themes that happen in the book of Exodus. And how did I come up with these themes? Once again, I Googled. And there's some acknowledgments that you can click to see where I received information from for the stuff that I do in this dashboard. And in this table, we'll see that I'm starting to make some connections to external sources, specifically to Wikipedia. So, for example, if I go to Exodus 12 here and I look up Moses, first of all, I hover over Moses and you can see that this was about the Passover. The theme here was the Passover. And if I, let me drag this down a little bit here, I can see the chapters and verses where Moses appears in Exodus 12. And you'll also see that there are links to a number of Wikipedia articles that talk about Moses. For example, here's a Wikipedia article about Aaron. And this statement here says that the Hebrew Bible relates that unlike Moses, who grew up in the Egyptian royal court, Aaron and his elder sister Miriam remained with their kinsmen in the northeastern region of the Nile Delta. Aaron was a brother of Moses. And if I click on this Wikipedia article link, it will take me right to Wikipedia, and it will also take me right to that sentence in Wikipedia. It doesn't always work. There's still some work to be done to perfect this, but oftentimes it'll take you right not only to the article, but right to the sentence within the article. I've done something similar to that with Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy as well. So you have that, and also you have on the right, you'll have wiki articles having to do with that chapter of that book in general. So if I click here, and so this is frozen in place, and there is a Wikipedia article called Exodus from Egypt, which talks about this verse from Exodus, and we go there, and there we can see the reference to that. So it's an attempt for me to try to connect to other sources um, with with my dashboard. Let's look at another one. Let's scroll down to one that I haven't seen before or done much before. Let's see. How about Daniel, which takes place about 600 BC? And I pull up Daniel, and here's Daniel 2, Daniel 3, Daniel 4. Again, we have the same kind of idea, themes, and whatnot. Let's look at Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 2. So here's the places in Daniel 2, the verses in Daniel 2 where Nebuchadnezzar is discussed. And then similarly, I can go to a wiki article. So here's a wiki article on Babylon that has this sentence about Nebuchadnezzar, and I go there, and there we have it. So this is what I try to do with the dashboard. I'll do one more real quick one. Let's go to a New Testament one here. Acts. And let's take a look at Paul. And Paul and Barnabas were working together. So here we are in Acts. Let's take a look at this article on Paul and Barnabas, Paul's first missionary journey. And there's Paul and Barnabas successfully evangelizing God-fearing Gentiles. So that's the sort of thing that you can get out of this part of the dashboard. The previous sections, books, relations, places, and timeline, focused on what I would consider the plot of the story. Who were the characters? How did they interact with each other? Where did things happen? When did things happen? That sort of thing. The remaining sections have more to do with lessons, themes, morals, that sort of thing. And what better place to start with the Ten Commandments? So here we have the Ten Commandments shown here. They're actually explicitly stated in both Exodus and in Deuteronomy, and they're worded slightly differently in each of them. But here on the left, you have some simple English explanation of them, like, thou shalt have no gods before me. Now, if I hover over this, I will see the text where there are other gods being worshipped. And if I click here to freeze it, I can now take a look at the texts that have all these other gods, Chemosh, Baal, Ashtoreth. There's lots of them. And Baal is actually quite a big one. And if I then go to that section, to that chapter and verse and book, as usual, you see let me move this out of the way, you see the text for that. So that's one. Let's take a look at another one. How about idols? Talking about graven images and etc. How about remembering the Sabbath day? There's a lot of places in the Bible that talk about the Sabbath, and we can go all the way down and see Nehemiah, Ezekiel, John, etc. Let's go to murder. That's kind of juicy. There's murder. Oops. Let me try that again. Here's murder. And if I go all the way to the top, lo and behold, there's Cain killing his brother Abel. We all know that story. That's not the only story of murder in the Bible. Let's go to this guy right here, Esau, who hated Jacob, and he was going to kill his brother, it says. And you got all kinds of murdering and slaying and killing and that sort of thing. So that's the way you can interact with the Ten Commandments. And let's go to something else now. Let's look at the 7 deadly sins, shall we? Do you know the 7 deadly sins? Can you list them? Here they are: pride, wrath, greed, lust, sloth, envy, and gluttony. I think there's other versions of it, but I think this is the most common. The 7 deadly sins, I don't think, originated from the Bible. I don't think you see it enumerated specifically 7 deadly sins in the Bible. They were created by a Christian monk a few hundred years after the death of Christ, and I think also adopted by a Pope Gregory in the 6th century. I Googled that. That's how I learned these things. And if I click on a sin, you'll see that for each sin, you see the same kinds of visualizations. So if I go to pride, I see the tree on the right, as you've seen that before. Let me pick Proverbs. I picked Proverbs here, and we can see all of the places where pride or something like pride shows up, because there's synonyms to pride, or there's related words. There's pride itself, there's vanity, there's proud. And if I click and freeze the text, I can see the surrounding surrounding text surrounding that particular chapter and verse. So that's the tree. And on the left, so that's the tree. And what you see with the tree is you see the word, the sin we've selected, all the books where it appears, and then all the chapters and verses of a particular book where it appears. And then on the left, you see this circular visualization. This is called a sunburst. And it's centered around the sin of choice. And surrounding it are some words that are about pride. And these wedges here, the size of the wedge has to do with how often it appears. So pride is the most often. Proud comes fairly frequently as well. If I look at proud here, here's every place where proud is appearing in all of the books. And again, I can see stuff. And you'll also notice that at the third level outside of the circle are some words like shall and therefore. And later we'll see some other ones when we look at some other sunburst visualizations. And these help to put some context into the selected word. So again, we had proud here, but maybe we want to see where we see proud and shall in the same sentence. And here we have all the places where there is proud and shall, or something like shall, like will, etc. So it gives you some context. Haughtiness doesn't come up that often, but it comes up a bit. And where we see haughty and shall, it comes up. And we could look at other sins as well. Here's wrath. Let's see what they say about vengeance. Lots of vengeance. Let's see what they say about hate. Lots of hate. And see what we say about hate with therefore. Lots of hate and therefore. See what they say about anger. Lots of anger. There's a lot of anger going on these days in the world. And we can see what they say about shall with anger. Should is kind of like shall. Will is kind of like shall. Therefore, the anger of Jehovah was kindled. So, he's got anger as well. Wrath is a sin for us, but I guess it's okay if Jehovah feels some wrath. And we could say the same thing for lust. Let not sin therefore reign. And here's lust with is or are. And here's lust with shall. So you can see all of these sins and see them in the context of certain kinds of conclusions, if you will, or associated thoughts from looking at the sunburst visualization. And we'll see the sunburst visualization appear elsewhere, but that's what I have to say about 7 deadly sins for now. The last section of the dashboard is ideas and themes. So let's go there. And when you read a book like the Bible, oftentimes we're kind of looking at it through a certain lens, if you will. We're focusing on things of interest to us. So I came up with a few things of interest to me to focus on. Women in the Bible, feelings, war and conflict, law and justice, and all the rest. Let's start with women in the Bible. And I mentioned to you before that women aren't talked about all that much in the Bible. And Mary looks like she's at the top of the list. She only has 46 mentions. Let's compare that to some of the guys in the Bible. Let's go back to books here. And Jehovah is like over 1,000. David is 1,000. Jehovah and God together is over 1,000. David's 1,000. Jesus is almost 800. And we got to go way down the list before we get to women. There's Rachel. And so I thought it's a good idea to give women a fair shot here. And so if I pick Mary, for example, you see the books where Mary is. And we can see Mary in a book like Luke, for example, or we can see Mary talked about, and the same sort of thing where you can go to that particular section of the Bible and see it in context. And also, we have links for these women, for many of them, to Wikipedia articles. So this takes us to a Wikipedia article having to do with Mary. Let's look at someone else. Let's look at Abigail. Remember Abigail, who hung out with Samuel? Not with Samuel, I'm sorry, with David. And David is prominent in Samuel, so Abigail appears also in Samuel. If I pick Samuel, and I can see Abigail with Samuel, and click for the Wikipedia article, and there it is. As long as we're talking about David, King David, let's go to Bathsheba, who was also involved with David. We can see her in Kings, for example, and we can go to the Wikipedia article for Bathsheba. So that's women in the article. These other ones, feelings and war and conflict and law and justice, etc., these are more like conceptual, more ideas. They're not really about people or characters. So the types of visualizations I'm using are similar to what I did with the 7 deadly sins. So if I go to feelings, for example, let's look at some feelings. Let's look at happiness. We all want to be happy, right? Let's look at fear. A lot of us are afraid these days. Let's look at hatred. A little bit too much hate going on these days as well. And you can have therefore, and you can have shall, and you can have if then. Let's look at anger. A lot of anger in the Bible. We already saw that about wrath. So that's all about different kind of feelings. What else would I like to look at? Let's look at money. Turns out there's a lot of stuff about money in the Bible. Silver, gold, selling, buying, shekels, and also the contextual things that surround that. Let's look at sex. Sex is all over the Bible. Adultery, prostitutes, concubines, harlots, etc. What else? Virginity, sexual organs, all kind of stuff. Ritual, a lot of ritual in the Bible. Let's look at the Sabbath. Lots of stuff having to do with the Sabbath. Here, what do we say? If ye will not hearken unto me to hallow the Sabbath day, and not to bear a burden and enter in the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will kindle a fire in the gates thereof, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem. Well, that doesn't sound too good. So that's about ritual. There's death, of course, as well. There's families and tribes, about wife, and about daughter, and about brethren, and about father. So you see all of those ideas, and many of these ideas have this if-then kind of thing going on with them, or this shall thing going on with them, and you can focus on that. So that's how we interact with ideas and themes. So now that I showed you the dashboard, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I did this. I used natural language processing. I used data visualization. There was a procedure I went through, and I'm going to discuss that a little bit. The natural language processing engine comes from Stanford University. It's called Core NLP, and it does a lot of cool stuff. You throw text at it, it'll break that text into sentences. And it'll take each sentence and it'll break it into what are called tokens. And these can be either individual words, or they could be punctuation marks. Or if, for example, it's a contraction like won't, the woe will be one token and the nt will be another token. For each of those tokens, it's going to identify the part of speech. Is this word a noun, a verb, an adjective, etc.? And it'll also do something called lemmatization. The lemma is the root form of the word. So if the word in the sentence is a plural noun, for example, it'll recognize the singular. If the word in the sentence is a verb in future tense or past tense, it'll recognize the present tense. The woe in won't will be recognized as will, and the nt in won't will be recognized as not. So that can come in very handy. There's also something called named entity recognition, and this is very useful for a story because each word will be recognized, or at least there's an attempt to recognize it, a word as maybe a person or a place or an organization or some other item of interest. There's several of these. Some of them are listed here. And then for sentences, it does something called dependency parsing, which is recognizing relationships between words within a sentence. And that comes in very handy. As a matter of fact, where it really comes in handy in the dashboard was in the network diagram and the relations, recognizing that two people are directly interacting with one another. The named entity recognition is seeing that, yes, these are names of people. And the dependency parsing is seeing that, well, if there's two people that are really directly interacting with each other, it can see that. So that's all very cool stuff. And by the way, none of this is using GPT technology or LLMs or this deep learning stuff that we're hearing all about. I guess I'd call it old-fashioned AI in a way. I'm going to have something to say about GPT and old-fashioned AI and stuff in a little bit. Of course, AI is a wonderful thing, but you have to be careful about making sure that it's right. Part of speech tagging is usually right, but sometimes it gets things wrong. Dependency parsing and named entity recognition gets things wrong a significant amount of time. And so therefore, a lot of corrections have to be made if the final result is going to be reliable. And there's a big effort involved in that, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. As far as data visualization is concerned, I use two software libraries. One is called D3 for data-driven documents, and the other is the Google Visualization Libraries. And what we see in the dashboard, the word cloud, the tree, the word cloud, the tree, the force graph, and the sunburst are all D3 visualizations, and you can see the sections of the dashboard that these are used in. And for the Google, the table or the list, the timeline, and the maps, those are all Google visualizations. And all of those require coding in JavaScript to work with. This is a pretty significant part of my coding effort. So the process for doing this, for building this dashboard, is as follows. I start with the text of the Bible. There's about 770,000 words or so in the Bible. I send it to the core NLP engine. Now, that is very computationally intensive. I need a powerful computer to work for 15, 20 hours to process that 770, 780 words of text. And that powerful computer is something I rent from AWS, Amazon Web Services. You can rent computers by the hour. It spits out those results, the core NLP results, and that's the sentences broken out and the tokenization and the lemmatization and the named entity recognition and all the rest. So I have that data, and then I have to transform that data so that it can be used in the visualizations. So now I have the transformed data. All of this stuff happening up here is involving code of my part that's either in Java or in Python. And then that transformed data allows me to create the visualizations. At this point, I'm starting to do stuff in JavaScript. I create the visualization. I see the dashboard. I look at the dashboard and say, wait a second, that's not right. I got to fix that. This is a person, and it thinks it's a place. So I got to fix it. And then I find the data, and I fix the data, and then I recreate the visualizations. Okay, it's a little bit better. There's this now. And then I have to do it again. And then I have to do it again. And then I have to do it again, hopefully narrowing in on making it more and more and more accurate. This is the life of a coder. I've been a coder all my adult life. It's an itch I have to scratch. I didn't know much about the Bible before I started this project. I had some religious experience as a kid, but I quickly became skeptical of the mythological and judgmental stuff that you see in the Bible. But working on this project forced me to learn a lot about the Bible. That's not surprising. In my 45 years as a coder, I've been forced to learn a lot of things I had no prior experience. I learned about the trucking industry, health insurance, civil engineering, inventory management, marketing, even the telephone business, at least way back in the era of Ma Bell, if you've ever heard of that before. I worked for one of the baby bells. That shows how old I am. So during this project, I studied the Bible. And in the upper right corner of the dashboard, you can see the source text that I used. I also studied lots of other sources on the web, not the least of which is Wikipedia, which has tons and tons of articles related to the Bible. Of course, there's many other websites about the Bible, and I explored several of them. I still wouldn't consider myself to be an expert, but I know a lot more about the Bible than I used to. I tried to use AI to help folks navigate the Bible. And I have some thoughts about AI, this powerful and exciting and scary technology. The latest buzzword in this field is generative AI. I'm sure you've heard of ChatGPT. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and it's based on something called LLMs, or large language models, which are extremely powerful deep learning algorithms, kind of like neural networks on steroids. Some folks claim that GPT passes the Turing test. What is the Turing test? It's named after Alan Turing, a very famous mathematician and one of the founding pioneers of computer science, and a war hero. He led a team of mathematicians in Britain who cracked the Germans' Enigma code, which was their encryption of secret communications. Cracking that code greatly helped the Allies defeat the Nazis in World War II. And then he was treated horribly by the British government because he was gay. He died at a pretty young age by cyanide poisoning, and a lot of people think he committed suicide because of that mistreatment. He won't get much sympathy from the Old Testament. Look at Leviticus 20:13 or Leviticus 18:22. This seems to call for the death penalty. In the New Testament, you can see similar prohibitions from 1 Corinthians and from 1 Timothy. See, I've learned some stuff from the Bible. So what's the Turing test? Turing himself didn't call it that. He called it the imitation game. And there's a movie with the same name. Perhaps you've seen it. Basically, this test says that if a computer can fool you into thinking you're talking with a real person, this means the computer is intelligent, that it can think, that it has a mind. Not everyone agrees with that, but it certainly seems to be a goal of many AI practitioners. So arguably, computers have reached the point where they can convince us that they're human, and this entices us to engage with them accordingly. There's a certain seductive pleasure to this, but it can be dangerous, and we're all becoming more and more aware of that. Some of the greatest minds in AI are struggling with the social and moral implications and trying to figure out how to gain the benefits and reduce the harms that this technology promises, just like with all technologies that came before it. Computers are approaching the ability to make us feel like we're talking with real humans, and they can be very good at predicting stuff. But does this mean they have common sense? I read a very interesting book by a fellow named Hector Levesque. He's a computer scientist. He was at the University of Toronto. I think he's retired now. And the book is called Common Sense, the Turing Test, and the Quest for Real AI. And his argument in this book is that despite all of the tremendous advances in AI, and particular machine learning, this stuff that neural networks does, and by the way, he wrote this book several years ago, 2017 or 18, I think it was. So GPT was not, in common parlance, in household parlance, like it is now. But I'm sure he was well aware of the research that was going on. His argument is that something is missing from machine learning, this technology that can find patterns in data much, much, much faster than any human can. And the thing that's missing is what he called common sense, or what you might call knowledge, or what you might even call wisdom. He argued, well, let me talk about knowledge first. Back when I was first getting involved in artificial intelligence in the 1980s, the buzzword wasn't machine learning so much, or neural networks, although they were starting to come to the fore. Really, what the buzzword was at the time was expert systems. And the idea of an expert system is that you capture knowledge from an expert by interviewing them, by watching them work, by, studying documentation, etc. And then you try to represent that knowledge in what was called a knowledge base, like a database. And the format of this knowledge base, well, there are many different formats, but probably the most common one is called rule-based systems. So say you're capturing the expertise of a doctor for a diagnostic system. You talk with the doctor, you find out what the rules are, and you store those rules. They're in the form of if-then statements. And then you apply the expert system to run against those rules. And so you give the expert system some facts, and those facts are probably the symptoms that the patient is exhibiting. And what your conclusion will hopefully be is a diagnosis. And you start with the facts that have the symptoms, and then you'll find some rules that match against the symptoms, and those rules will then trigger conclusions that become new facts. And then you run it again against all of these new facts, and you get some new facts from conclusions in this kind of logical, deductive reasoning sort of way, until finally you come up with a diagnosis. Or perhaps you start with a hypothesized diagnosis and you work your way backwards to see if the facts match the diagnosis. In either case, you're taking existing knowledge that has been stored in some database in some format, and you're applying some kind of inference mechanism to it. That's not what machine learning does. Machine learning finds patterns in data, and thereby, Levesque says, it lacks common sense. And Levesque argues that, not that you get rid of machine learning, but that you do more supplementing of machine learning with knowledge-based technologies. And he calls that good old-fashioned AI, GOFAI. If you read the book, and I highly recommend it, it's not a very technical book, but it's very thought-provoking. If you read the book, you'll see GOFAI, that acronym. in the book in a few places. What I try to do, what I tried to do in this project, is to use AI and natural language processing to present the wisdom of the ages. Now, that's old fashioned, and that's for sure. Um, I'd also argue that I could apply it to other things, and I intend to try and do that. I'm very interested in Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Zen. The Quran is another possibility. If you look at my site, you'll see that I've applied Story Analyzer to philosophy, in particular articles of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And I've got dashboards of some pretty important philosophical topics: truth, justice, ethics. I've applied it to law. If you look at the Mueller report, if you look at the First House impeachment report, or the January 6th report, or Trump's indictments, all of these are legal documents. I've applied it to history. I've applied it to journalism. I've applied it to literature. And I invite you to play with these dashboards and see for yourself. My goal going forward is to use AI and natural language processing to enlighten people, not just to engage with them, not just to seduce them, certainly not to manipulate them, certainly not to misinform them, but to give them useful, actionable intelligence. That's the goal that I have. So, if you made it this far, congratulations. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good day.